Hello and welcome to Arsenal Analysed. I'm JC. I hope you're doing well. Today, I bring you yet another scout report on the channel. A player hotly linked with Arsenal at the minute, Gianluca Scamacca, a striker, a physical presence, and one of many on the list of players that Arteta is looking to target this summer. Now, if you're looking forward to analysing and breaking down Scamacca, please go ahead and smash that like button. And if you're new around here, why not consider subscribing as well, as it massively helps me out. But what will we be covering during today's video? First things first, we'll be looking at the basics, a player profile, if you will, before heading into looking at his movement and heat maps over the last couple of seasons, then breaking down his numbers, comparing him to a few other players in the process, and to finish up going through his strengths, weaknesses, and also looking at how he compares to other forwards across the top 5 leagues in Europe. So without no further ado, let's jump into things. Gianluca Scamacca of Saasuolo, 23 years old, so a good age, not quite at his peak yet, coming into that sort of range, I'd say, in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. So a player with potentially a very high ceiling. And that is one of the reasons why not only Arsenal, but clubs like Dortmund and also Juventus are being linked with the player. He is predominantly right-footed, standing at 6'3", so a player that's a little bit different to the Gabriel Jesuses that we're being linked with, giving Arteta potentially variety in his attacks should we sign 2 strikers. Now, his contract does run until June 2026, meaning that all the power does sit with Sassuolo. However, a bid recently, if rumours are to be believed, went in from Arsenal in the region of around sort of 30 to 35 million pounds. However, Sassuolo are said to want around 40 million pounds to let the player go. So one to keep an eye on, and we'll have to wait and see whether or not Arsenal come back with a second bid. Having a look at his heat map from this season, as well as the previous season in Serie A, we can see here initially that a lot of the movement, a lot of the deep red and yellow on those heat maps on the left-hand side very much sit centrally. Now, he does, although very tall, come deep to link up play, and that is one of the stronger parts of his game. Not something that you always necessarily associate with a taller physical presence, but I will certainly welcome it because Arsenal just didn't have that last season. And there were games in those last 10, 20 minutes where we could have used that height and physical presence to maybe nick a point or even a win. Looking back at the season prior to last, there is a little bit more deep red and yellow on that right-hand side. That might be because he favours whipping the ball into the box or playing those diagonal balls for colleagues. But one or two players that I wanted to compare him to was Tammy Abraham, because he was in the Premier League and has recently moved to Serie A, and Lukaku, who has essentially yo-yoed between the 2 leagues. Both very physical, big players. Tammy Abraham probably the most similar in terms of height and stature. But if we have a look here, I'd say that Tammy Abraham, especially from this season, is very, very similar. He does seem to want to get out wide a little bit more, happy to drop deep and link up play, similarly to Scamacca, whereas Lukaku is definitely more of a physical presence, a more stockier player, very, very difficult for defenders to handle. And we can see here that a lot of his movement does sit inside that 18-yard box. But if we do compare that to the previous season, very similar to Scamacca, where he situates himself to the right-hand side. And one thing that I did want to look at next are the numbers from last season, so that we can get an idea that if similar players were to join up with Arsenal in the Premier League, how they might get on. It might give us an idea of what to expect. So let's have a look at those numbers. In the white, we've got over the course of the season, and then in yellow, it's on average per 90 minutes. So looking at Scamacca first, one thing that jumps out at me immediately is that he played a similar level of games to Abraham, 36 and 37 respectively. But to my surprise, Scamacca has near enough played 1,000 less minutes and scored a similar amount of goals, 16 compared to Abraham's 17, which says to me that there is a lot of good quality in there. And not many assists, granted, not one for maybe picking up a colleague, releasing the ball. Yes, he does link up play fairly deep, but when in that final third, he may not look for colleagues. He's always going for that shot, that killer goal maybe. If we have a look at Lukaku, we know he's had a bit of an off season. He's played the least amount of minutes and games. He still has managed to bag himself 8 goals. Unfortunately, I would say that the way he tends to play his game doesn't suit the style of play and formation that Tuchel tends to play, hence why he's potentially looking for a move back to Inter Milan. But let's have a look at some of the other numbers here. We've got 2.8 shots per game, which is the most out of all 3 players, and also the best completion rate of 56%. Passing also at the higher end compared to Abraham and Lukaku. Now, I did expect the pass completion rate to be a little higher than 73% because he does like to come deep and link up play. And if he's going to be playing in a much faster, more physical league, in an Arsenal team that like to keep the ball and move the ball quite a lot, those short, sharp passes, very direct play at times, those numbers, for me at least, will probably need to improve. He does, although he hasn't recorded any assists this season in Serie A, he does have a chances created of 1.1 per game, which is the slowest on the list. And to my surprise, Lukaku has the most, where he's often criticised for his poor passing abilities. Crossing-wise, all around 0.5. Scamacca at the lower end of that. To be completely honest with you, I wasn't expecting this number to be too high. These guys are target men. Although in those heat maps that we just looked at, they do like to occasionally get wide. They're not being the guy whipping the ball in the box. These guys are on the end of those crosses due to their height and physical presence. Dribbles, 1.3 per game with a completion rate of 70%. Again, the highest on the list. And you don't often see very big players good with the ball at their feet. Isaac was a player that we were recently linked with who is a very good dribbler, not often meeting that stereotype. But if we have a look at other tall strikers like Peter Crouch, for example, wasn't exactly very good with his feet running at defenders. But Scamacca, definitely a player worth keeping an eye on, having recorded the best numbers in this department compared to the other 2 players on this list. Aerial duels, he wins over 50% of his aerial duels like every other player on this list. On average, 3.8 per game, which is the lowest compared to Abraham and Lukaku. So a little bit of a surprise there, but we do know that Arsenal tend to whip quite a lot of balls into the box, and it's been a bit of a downfall for Arsenal this season, not having the right player on the end of them. I'm not too sure if this is something that Saasuolo typically tend to do. They might be limited more to counter-attacking football, meaning that they're not in a position to often whip that ball into the box, not allowing Scamacca to really get on the end of them, although he is probably a very good outball when looking to counter-attack. Last but not least, 7.5 ground duels per game, loves to get involved, loves to put himself around, very fearless by the looks of things, but he only completes 33%, which is the lowest on this list. He's not being brought in to win those ground duels, although Arsenal do have a high press, and it will be something that he needs to work on. It isn't an area that I'm particularly worried about. Now, to finish up, we are going to look at his strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, in green, strengths, red, weaknesses. So a very good finisher of the ball, which has just been reflected in some of those numbers that we looked at, including those aerial duels. Long balls is another one, not in terms of him getting on the end of them, but him picking that ball up and hitting those long diagonals. Very, very good for that. Obviously, a long ball threat, something that Arsenal haven't had, is that out ball. There were games last season against the likes of Brighton and Crystal Palace on both occasions where Arsenal were penned in deep. We were whipping the ball long to the likes of Lacazette and Aubameyang, and it just wasn't working. And that anchor play is another big strength of his as well. Not quite on the same level as a Lacazette, who went through a phase in that back end of the season where he linked up play very well. Not quite on that level, but still very, very good. Ground duels has, as we've already identified, definitely one of his weak points, and holding on to that ball as well. He often, when running at defenders or making to look that pass, he can sometimes lose the ball. Now, looking on the left-hand side, we have a graph here, if you will, and it's essentially Scamacca compared to his peers in the forward position across the top 5 leagues and European competitions over the last 12 months. So to give you an example, on average, he has 0.63 non-penalty goals per game, which puts him in the top 93 percentile in Europe. So that is a very, very good thing. And then we've also got non-penalty XG, putting him in the top 76%. So very, very good numbers there. Also, in terms of shots, he records on average across Europe 3.27 per 90 minutes, putting him in the top 84 percentile. Now, we won't go through the rest of them, but as you can see there, those in red in the lower percentile, the more green they are, the better those numbers are. And there's some very, very good numbers to really assess there, like his pass completion rate, clearances, which was a bit of a surprise, and also his tackles. But by all means, pause the video at this point and take a look at them at your own pace and leisure. But that is going to about wrap things up for today's video. A very good striker, in my opinion, with a lot of potential and a player that I wouldn't mind at Arsenal. Very different to a Gabriel Jesus. Different options offering different things. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Should Arsenal sign Scamacca? If you have enjoyed today's video, a like would be super appreciated. And if you're new around here, please do consider hitting that subscribe button as well. But for now, I'm JC, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe and take care.